Debt ceiling debate resumes after several weeks of almost no communication between House Republicans and the White House. Many economists warning that there could be an economic crisis if the limit is not properly dealt with. So joining us this morning to discuss that is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Brandon, welcome back to the National Desk.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. When pressed by House GOP for spending negotiations, we understand the White House refused to really budge until Republicans put forth their budget proposal. Bit of a stalemate there. So where do we stand in these negotiations?
Yeah, these negotiations, I think stalemate is a better description than negotiations at this point because, unfortunately, the White House has really refused to budge. They haven't put forth a plan on how we can get the deficit under control. They haven't engaged in any kind of conversations with House Republicans. And I'm not going to put all the blame on the White House here because I think House Republicans need to put together more of a concrete plan. Thus far, we've just seen kind of a broad outline, a sketch of what they want. They need more detail on the table in order for these negotiations to really continue in earnest.
Yeah, so House Speaker Kevin McCarthy laying out, says you pointed out some broad areas with cutting trillions of dollars in spending, but not necessarily drilled down to really specific points. How important is a clear budget when handling this debt ceiling?
It's incredibly important. And the group that has put together the most detail there is the Freedom Caucus. But what needs to come out of leadership, House Republican leadership, is a concrete plan. And that plan needs to be laser focused on the problem at hand, and that is the debt crisis. The fact that we are spiraling out of control when it comes to spending. We're seeing interest payments, debt interest payments, absolutely explode because interest rates have increased and because we have not had any kind of fiscal discipline in Washington. So House Republicans need to be very detailed what exactly they're going to cut, how they're going to go about cutting it. Of course, their plan is not going to see its way through to being enacted in its entirety, but at least that's a starting point for negotiations. They can start to have a back and forth right now. That back and forth has not begun, unfortunately.
Well, and one of the sticking points, maybe as you just pointed out, the Freedom Caucus laying out a list of some pretty drastic prerequisites for voting to raise the debt ceiling. In other words, what the country can borrow and then as a result spend. What do you think of their demands?
Well, I think their demands are kind of more at the right side of the Republican Party in terms of the conservative spectrum, of course. So I think it's unlikely that they could get 218 House Republicans to support this vote, let alone get it through the Senate and to the president's desk. But I think it's a good starting point here to start those conversations within the House Republican Conference. I do like the fact that they've held spending in their plan at 2022 levels. I don't think that's a drastic step, but I do think they've kind of gone outside of the lines of the coloring book to some extent by including regulation. I'm a huge fan of reining in the regulatory state, but at the same time, we need to be laser focused at the problem at hand here, as I said, and that is overspending. Regulation is correlated to spending, but it's not exactly the same thing.
But if we're talking numbers here, 500 pieces of legislation that they're discussing, totaling $1 trillion in cuts over 10 years, is that even realistic to pass?
No, I don't think it's realistic. Like I said, I don't think you're going to be able to get 218 House Republican votes, let alone bring along some Democrats, which is absolutely necessary. But I do think it's important to have these conversations, to throw these trial balloons out there and see what's successful and see what's not in the public domain here, see what's going to get support. Again, I don't think ideas like clawing back COVID dollars, we have at least $100 billion of unspent funds out there that should be rescinded. I don't think reining in what President Biden did on student debts, where you're talking about $400 billion in loan forgiveness with the stroke of a pen, I think that should absolutely be on the table. So some of these ideas certainly deserve a very serious conversation with Republicans and Democrats in Washington. Other ones will be left on the cutting room floor, of course.
Quickly, while I've got you for another 30 seconds here, the Senate did just pass a bill ending the national COVID emergency. And right now, COVID spending projected at $1.4 trillion for the year 2023. Can we see that spending roll back now that it's no longer a national emergency?
Yeah, I think that spending will start to roll back. And one of the main reasons is Medicaid. What the COVID bills did when they were passed into law was expand eligibility, basically provide a fast track for people to get onto Medicaid programs. That was arguably necessary at a time when we didn't know what the heck was happening with COVID. We didn't want people to be left without insurance. Now that we're getting back into normalcy once again, I think we can find better off-ramps, better health insurance options for people than Medicaid, looking for private options out there. But that's one area where states and the federal government could experience a reduction of spending as people start to migrate off of Medicaid into private health insurance programs.
Yeah, always trying to find places to cut responsibly. All right, Brandon, Arnold, thank you so much for joining us here on the National Desk this Monday morning.
Thanks for having me.